Hello there.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Can I ask you a couple of questions before
Yes,
everybody
please do.
piles in?
Absolutely.
I've done the collar.
Uh-huh.
Here it is. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I'm really happy with it. I'm really, really pleased with it. Took blinking ages. But anyway, there was just a couple of things. When we put the top collar on, and was sewing it round, we sewed it round, and then you said to trim the seam just of the under collar, so I didn't touch the, so is that okay that it sits in there?
Yeah, because you don't want the two seam allowances to be the same width, because if they're at the same width when you press it, you're going to see a hard edge. So
Oh, I see. Kind of grading. And
yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So, you know, when we had our office hour, I showed you this disaster. Do you remember the disaster?
Well, I wouldn't call it a disaster, but
so I'm just wondering, if I take the collar off and if I was to make a collar exactly how you shown us on the Raglan, would that work?
it would.
Yeah. So on this trench coat, they did the collar stand separately from the collar, whereas yours is integrated.
Yes.
Does that matter?
Doesn't matter. It's just a stylistic issue.
Oh, okay. I'm going to do it just the way you did it then. Right, fine. I'm happy about that.
So glad to help. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I made some dinky little thingies.
Oh, the cuff latches. Yes. Uh-huh. Well, today our first thing we're going to be opening with top stitching, and then we're going to move on to setting up the single welt pocket, and next week will be installing the single welt pocket. So that's kind of where we're going today. So it's going to be fun.
Is there a pocket on both sides of the coat?
Yes. Right.
Oh, I forgot to, I didn't think like that. Yeah, so I need to just mark that up on the other side then, because I cut mine out separately because it's this houndstooth stuff. So
yeah, well, you know what you could do is lay one on top of the other and make the tailor tacks.
Yeah, and I've got the tailor tacks on one. I just I just kind of sewed a mark, but I haven't put it through on the other side. But I'll do that. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, thank you.
That's easy enough to do. So how is everybody today? It looks like everyone is here with smiling faces.
That's really good.
Yes. Well, I have to show you something. I don't know if you watch me on Instagram, but I got them back.
Oh wow. Wow.
And on Instagram, he had the soles painted red, and I was looking at it, and I contacted him back and I said, little too much contrast. So could we do something else, like a burgundy? And so that is what he did. So I'm very, very happy. Yes, that was a high-end shoe repair, but boy, for these shoes, I was willing to do it because the guy, there's his name is Steve. He has on YouTube Bedos, Bedos, Bedos Leatherworks. He does high-end shoe repair. His grandfather repaired shoes. His father repaired shoes. He repairs shoes, and he really raised the bar for what is possible when you have your shoes repaired. So when my guy did the half sole a year ago, I asked him if he could make that shape because there was a line on the original sole. No, can't do it. And he just slapped the things on and it just bugged me. I thought, I am never going to wear these shoes until I get them properly tended to. So I have them back now. So now there's the whole first wearing. What is the first wearing going to be? My husband's birthday is on the 20th. I'm going to take him out to dinner. If for no other reason, then I get to wear my shoes again. So there we have it.
That's a good
So
reason.
before we get busy with today's lesson, does anybody have questions? Crickets, crickets. Yes. Jennifer, yes, go ahead. Okay, I can't hear you. You might want to turn your microphone on. Okay. Past unmute. Okay, try it. Still can't hear you. Okay, well, um, okay, I don't know. I don't know how to fix that. So, but if nothing else, you can email me, or maybe after or between, we'll be able to make this work. Tech stuff is not my forte. So we will. Where we're going today, for those who just have joined us, first is a little kind of reverie tutorial on top stitching, because you have your cuff latch, you have your collar, you're going to have your welt for your pocket that will need top stitching. And then we're going to go into setting up the welt pocket. There's how we draft the pattern, how we make the welt, how, the whole bit. And especially if you're matching a pattern, what I have found, and you'll see it when you see the videos, you can make this match so well that it kind of disappears. So this is the way, if you're matching patterns on a single welt pocket, this is a way to get your pocket to read exactly the same as the body of your fabric. So without any further ado, we will start. Let's see. One moment here. Tutorial. Okay, so let me just put that down there and share the screen. Here we are. Yay. And so, yes, I will ask, when I first turn it on, I'm going to stop it for a moment and ask if if you can hear it, just as insurance. So.
I'd like to take a few minutes for a top stitch tutorial.
So can everybody hear that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so here we go.
These here are samples of different kinds of top stitching. So I will be outlining them shortly, but I wanted to just point them out. So beginning over on our left, this is top stitching thread with single threads, just the regular top stitching you have in your machine. The next one to it is top stitching where we have 2 threads in the needle. We can either put the 2 threads in the needle, or we can use what's called a double-eyed needle, which you'll get to see in a moment. Now, moving on, this is what I call my top stitching machine. This is sewn with buttonhole thread or top stitch thread on the needle and on the bobbin. And I will talk about how you achieve that particular look. Then there's also hand sewing. These are 3 examples. The first one here is what's called a saddle stitch, which is basically a running stitch. Next to it is a hand pick stitch. And finally, the big finish is one that is called a chain stitch. This is a thread embroidery stitch, and I'm using a thread called ribbon floss. So we have all of these examples here, which I'm going to show you how to do. We have a lot to work on, so let's get busy. We will start the lesson on top stitching with a sample. This is roughly 4 inches. This is roughly 7 inches. I've sewn it together. So this could be the front of a jacket. This could be your collar. This could be really any kind of edge. But I think having this particular sample and then progressing from there so you can see the different examples of top stitching is the way to go. The first example I'm going to show you is just a straight from the machine top stitch. Now you notice here I have used disappearing chalk, and I have marked the chalk line 3/4 of an inch from the edge. That is a personal preference, but that is what I'm going to be using in this particular lesson. So first, let's go to the machine and see just a regular top stitch. For the standard top stitch, you could either use your regular presser foot or you could use the walking foot. Since this fabric is thick and a little bit spongy, I'm choosing to use the walking foot. So obviously I'm using contrasting thread so you can see what I'm up to. But as a rule, for tailoring, you want a longer top stitch rather than a shorter one. It looks better. It also, if you have a shorter top stitch, it could gather the fabric. It kind of compresses it this way, and you could have puckers. So I'm sewing at a 4.0 stitch. So this is what it looks like before pressing. I will go to the pressing table, give it a press, and bring it back here. After pressing, which makes the chalk disappear, here you have just a standard top stitch. Entirely respectable, but there are others. The next option for top stitching is having 2 threads threaded through your needle. Now, I would recommend you look at your machine's owner's manual to see how you do this. On the Bernina, you have one going through the final thread guide. You have one outside of it to keep them from getting tangled. The stitch length, again, is standard 4.5. Just sew this. You can see the difference. You can make this stitch a little longer if you wish. The general rule here is the longer the stitch, the better it reads. That's just something to keep in mind. Show you the result. Now let me go over to the pressing table and press this out, and I will bring it back so you can see the finished stitching. My assistant reminded me of needles that you can use if you're using 2 threads through one needle. It's called a double-eyed needle. It's fun to know these things. I don't see them very often, but as you can see, it is a needle with 2 eyes. So if you can't make 2 threads in your needlework, my assistant says, try this one. So there you have the finished stitching. Now, just to compare to the last one, just so you can see, it's a subtle difference, but important. It's good to know both. You can use both. So these are 2 machine top stitches. This is where my assistant says that not all machines are equal. This particular machine is called a Singer 301A. And for top stitching, as much as I adore my Bernina, it does not like top stitching thread. So what you want to do is you want to use a top stitching needle. And the Singer 301A, also the Featherweight does the same thing. You can actually put the buttonhole thread or top stitching thread in the needle and in the bobbin, and you make a top stitch that looks the same from both sides. Allow me to demonstrate. As you can see, this threads right to left. I set this on the longest stitch that the machine will make. I find that that's quite attractive. And let me just let it rip and show you what. You don't have the walking foot, but you can get a walking foot to this. Look at that. Is that not beautiful? I'm going to turn it over. And it looks the same from both sides. I will go steam this out and bring it back and show you the result. So here we are. Is that not a thing of beauty? So as they say, sometimes old school is better. And in this particular case, one of these old singers is just the ticket. So if you have one hanging around your workroom, you're all good. You can, some machines will accept the buttonhole thread or the top stitching thread in the needle and the bobbin. Some won't. It's good to have an alternative. For the hand stitching, we're going to wind buttonhole thread or Mara 30 onto the bobbin and have that in the bobbin case. Get this into the bobbin. I will install this into the machine and we will proceed. Now that we have the buttonhole thread in the bobbin, the next thing we want to do is loosen the top tension. It doesn't have to be completely loose, but you want the threads to drop down below the surface of the fabric. The white thread is the buttonhole thread. I'm setting the stitch length on the longest stitch, and then I'm going to sew right next to where I want the top stitch. The top stitches will fall on the chalk line. You don't want to sew through the stitching you're putting down now. This is just a guide. So here, this is what it looks like from this side, and turning the work over, you can see the orange thread. What that means is that the bobbin thread is tighter than the top thread, which is looser. This will make it so that it's so easy to get this stitching out after you've sewn your hand stitches. This is the setup for the pick stitch and the saddle stitch. I would leave the chalk in, and then after everything is sewn, we'll take out the machine basting and then steam to get rid of the marks. So what I'm using this for, this machine marking with the bobbin thread, is a couple of hand stitches. The first one is the saddle stitch. So what you can do is you can use the stitch length. You can choose one stitch, you can choose two stitches, and you can enter and exit the fabric on those two stitches. Now you see I've used embroidery floss here. I'm using all 6 plies just so it reads. So what I would recommend is make a sample before you actually do this. And so you can see I'm coming out right on, and you can have it exactly on, and going back to the other side. Now this here, what this will create is something that reads well from both sides. So that's something to think about. If you want to use this on something like a collar, having something that reads from both sides is a little better. So I will sew a couple more, and then I will take it off camera and give it a steam and bring it back. So that's where we are so far. I will meet you back here in just a moment. And here we are. We have steamed the marks out. Now, the reason I loosened the upper tension was so that the upper thread would sit below the fabric. So this is where I come in and clip a few times. And then you can just take this thread out like so. Don't try to pull it all out at once. I don't think it works quite as well, but clipping it in a few places is going to allow you to remove the thread easily. here. Got a little hiccup here, but that's okay. There we are. So now we turn it over and grab the thread like so. Now I will go back and give it another little bit of steam to get rid of all of those marks on the fabric, and I will bring it back here. And here we have the result. Perfectly spaced saddle stitching. This is on the front, that is on the reverse. Ain't it beautiful? Next, pick stitching. For the next one, which is the pick stitch, I'm using 4 plies instead of 6. And again, we're going to use the stitches as our spacing, but the pick stitch is a little tiny back stitch. So I'm going back about 1 millimeter and forward 2 stitches. And that again, you would make a sample and decide what spacing that you wanted on this. Now this is not something that reads as well from the back, but it's considered a respectable finish. So a couple more, then I'll show you the result. It's actually quite pretty if you use an embroidery floss that has a little bit of sheen that matches the fabric. It's quite beautiful. So there is how it appears on the front. There's how it appears on the back. Again, not as pretty as the saddle stitch, but if you match the thread and keep the collar down, no problem. I will go off camera and finish the rest of this row and bring it back here. So here is the result. And I'm going to take the stitches out before I press this time, save a step. This is the easiest way to mark. Buttonhole thread, top stitching thread in the bobbin. And we take this out. So that's what it looks like before steaming. I will bring it back afterwards to show you the finished product. And here we are, pick stitching. So you have 2 options here in the hand stitching for top stitches. Saddle stitch, and you have the pick stitch. It is up to you as the designer which one you'd like to use. What I have decided to use for the top stitching on the garment I'm working on right now is called ribbon floss. It is a fancy thread woven on the bias in rayon. It's kind of shiny. I've decided I want to make a chain stitch, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you anchor your thread, and again, using your stitch length as your guide, I'm using 3 stitches here. 3 stitches. And you cast the thread over the needle. And you just continue. You come back, go back in where the needle emerged. And so 3 stitches. And you know, it doesn't matter whether you cast the thread right to left, left to right, doesn't really matter. Just be consistent. And so yes, you're going to catch we're catching both layers of fabric. So you're going to see this from the reverse. Now you'll see what that looks like in a few minutes. And you'll notice that it's kind of springy. It's rayon. It seems to have a life of its own. But for something that has a high texture, this really does the trick. This is a chain stitch. And if you really want to, what you could do is just sew the machine stitch in the matching color and sew this chain stitch over it. And that chain stitch, or the machine stitch, would disappear. So you really don't need to, if you don't want to, take this chain stitch, or take the machine stitch out. I'm getting my terms confused. So I will go off camera and sew down to the end because there's a way of securing that end. So I'm at the end here. I'm going to stop my stitch. So you bring thread over the needle again, and then you stitch down into the fabric. You want to tie that last loop down in place, because if you just let it hang out, the whole thing will unravel. This is a chain stitch. Then you would secure it on the back. And I like to bury the end of the thread here. So this is how it looks. I will go off camera and unravel all of the machine basting and steam it and bring it back here so you can enjoy. And here we have the results. Now, when you're using this, you want to make sure to consider which direction the stitch sews in, because as you can see, it is kind of a one-directional stitch. This is what it looks like from the back, but if you're working on a highly textured fabric, that really shouldn't show. So there you have it, the chain stitch with ribbon floss.
Okay then, so stop share. So thoughts, questions?
Does the top stitching serve a function other than decorative?
Yes, it ties the two layers together, the top and the bottom layer. And so when you're pressing, it's like, especially on the collar where you want the top to favor around so that the seam favors to the back, this holds everything so that it doesn't shift this way. So it's decorative, but it's also functional.
Is there a way to hide your carry then? Can you do if you're doing a pick stitch, can you bury the thread carry on the back side so you just have the little pin pricks through both layers?
Not really.
Okay.
But you could experiment with just catching the top layer and the seam allowances.
Okay.
But what I found, because I've done a lot of looking at bespoke garments, and there is this, it's sort of in that particular vernacular, having those stitches on the back is accepted because they understand what that means. So you have a little wiggle room with that. And also, I would look for the ones where it shows on the back. I would use those on something with a little higher texture so that the texture sort of distracts from that. Okay. So Laura, you had a question.
How far from the edge, like, so we're top stitching the collar edge and around the cuff latch right now, is that where we're top stitching?
Yeah. And we will also top stitch the welt. So, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I on this particular coat, I use the 3/4 of an inch.
You top stitch that far from the edge?
Yeah.
So on the cuff latch,
you could go 1/2 inch, or you can go 5/8.
Okay.
Okay. So other questions? Yes.
Yes. The ribbon floss, I mean, it comes in various sizes and things, I think. What's the name of yours? What's the brand? Do you know?
God, I wish I knew. It was one of those things that I got 100 years ago.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's I would say it's probably about 1/8 of an inch wide at the most.
Okay.
So
that helps.
I wish I had more information.
It's okay.
Okay, so other questions?
Yes, is there anything that you have to be careful of if you come to a corner?
Well, you would, you mean for which one? All of them or just,
I guess all of them, like say for the chain stitch, do you make sure you try to land that you end in the corner so that,
yeah, you know, you obviously you want to make, you want there to be a nice intersection. And so what, you know, especially with the chain stitch, you know, if you have the loop facing the corner and you're going to be going up this way, you want to take one tack to tack that loop down. Otherwise, what's going to happen is this loop is going to start riding up on the stitch going up.
okay,
Does that make sense? But other than that, it's just a matter of spacing it so that the stitching actually turns the corner.
okay. So if it's a little bit shorter or longer than the other ones,
It's
just
not
so
going to matter.
the corner, it
And
won't
so,
matter.
see, this is where I would encourage you to make a little sample before you begin. I do that. You know, some people think, oh, I don't need to make a sample. I've been doing this a good long time, and I will make a sample just to see, okay, how much, you know, what is the spacing of the stitching so that, you know, when I'm navigating around a corner, I know pretty much how to get that around the corner. If as far as stitch spacing, you know, like say around, you know, you have the two corners here and you
Mhm.
have the back edge of the collar, you can kind of play with the stitching along the back edge of the collar to make the corners match.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes.
Do you,
Well, oh, go ahead.
do you just do the back edge and the corner, and then you don't go up and do the bit higher up, presumably?
Well, you know, like on the collar, I come, you know, I come out of the
Come
edge.
down here and then up here.
Yeah, and so
But
what
then
you
do you do up here?
No, ma'am.
sure.
No, you would just bury, you know, on the short ends of the collar, you just take that out to the edge and that will then bury into the seam where you sew the collar to the body.
So you go up here and then stop at the edge.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
thank
Laura,
you.
you had another question?
I had two questions. Could you use embroidery floss for the chain stitch?
Absolutely, you could. Yes.
And then another question, if you were using, say, the chain stitch, could you start from center back and work around so that it's symmetrical?
Yes, that's actually what I did on the collar on this particular coat. Yeah. That, you know, because, you know, like you're right. You know, the directional thing, you don't want things going differently. Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that the eye will pick up, but it's like you may not know, the person looking at it may not know what's wrong, but they know there's something wrong. So yeah. Okay, other questions? Yes,
I have a question.
yes, go ahead.
Do you pre-treat your embroidery floss anyway?
Not really. I will, you know,
Mm.
any thread, like for hand sewing, any kind of thread, what I like to do is I like to iron it.
Okay.
You know, and see, debates rage over do you wax it, do you not wax it? Embroidery thread, no, you don't want to soil the embroidery thread. If I were sewing with a cotton thread or a silk thread, I would actually wax it and then iron it so that the wax melts and absorbs into the fiber. But I generally work with polyester, so the wax has nowhere to go. And so what I just do is I just, you know, drag it under the iron. I had a student in another class suggest, you all know what this is? This is your hair. He irons his thread with one of these, and I thought, now that's brilliant. So I got one. So, you know, if you don't want to fire up your iron, get out your you know, your flat iron. See, that never occurred to me because, you know, there's nothing there to flat iron. So it, you know. Okay, so other questions? Okay, yeah, yes, yes, Richard, question.
Yeah, I'm using a industrial sewing machine, and I'm wondering about this double-eyed needle. I can use it. All right.
I wouldn't use a double-eyed needle, but you can put two threads through your needle.
Through the needle, yeah.
I teach at FIT, and we have to use industrials there, and it works really well.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? Yes, Meredith. Oh, you need to turn on your mic.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, good.
You in your first samples, in your machine stitch samples, that was top stitching thread. It wasn't regular thread double?
Well, it was just regular thread.
Okay.
Yeah, the top stitching thread was for the Singer 301A. And,
Okay.
and you know, as much as it pains me, the Bernina doesn't like it
Yeah.
And if you can get your hands on, if you have a featherweight, the
Mhm.
featherweight hook system is the same as the 301A. So they both will do this. You know, so if you can get either one of those, the 301A, I just refer to that as my top stitching machine.
Okay.
It's all set up. That's all that machine does. When it's not top stitching, it's back in its box. So yeah.
Well, and top stitching, getting the color you want would be more problematic than using double thread. It was my thinking.
Well, you know, with top stitching thread, there's a thread I use called Mara 30. It's
Yeah.
they have amazing range of colors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you know, because you know, I'm here in New York. I just go to Sill Thread, and I just, you know, I buy, you know, the cones. But I'm sure you can get it in other places if you're in other parts of the country. But the Mara 30, I like it. First off, it's polyester. Secondly, it does come in a broad range of colors. Okay. Okay. So yes, Lori.
Sorry. Will we be using that style of top stitching like on the sleeves and the back and that as well? So the same. We need to make a decision for everything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's why I showed you at this point, because like, okay, you have the collar, you have the cuff latch. You're going to need it if you decide you want top stitching on the welt. And then all of the raglan seams will get that as well. Okay. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, yes. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so speaking of the welt and the top stitching, excuse me, I was going to use the color of my facing on the bottom, and then that would work. And then just having two different threads in the sewing machine.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, but my other question, if you don't mind, just going back just a minute. The welt buttonhole, I was actually gonna really now attempt bound buttonholes. Do I do that on the welt also?
Well, you know, I'm not going to stamp my feet and insist that, but in the last class, I had one gal who did, and she even made the little windows on the lining side. I was like, oh dear God.
Oh, so she made the windows out of the lining fabric.
Well, you know, because the back of the cuff latch is the lining fabric. It's not the
correct.
Yeah, and so she made the little windows in the lining fabric before she sewed everything together.
I'm not sure I have that in me.
You know, and so on this, because honestly, because see, the classic old school way of finishing those buttonholes, and it would be regarded as entirely correct. What they used to do is just cut a slash and whip stitch it to the back of the buttonhole.
Oh no, I've got one of those buttonholes. The keyholes now I want to try out, so I may just do that on the cuff latch.
Yeah, you could, you know, make that on the back and then sew the two together, and then, you know, because you know, you don't really look a lot at the back of the cuff latch. So
got it.
Don't get into the weeds over that one. Lori,
question. Perfect, thank you.
Are we doing a buttonhole on the cuff latch?
Yes, because you want it to, you know, to button, and there's a little bit of gather, you know, where it holds the thing. So yeah, you'll want a buttonhole on there.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so now the deep dive. This is where I get kind of geeky, because I really love the way that I make a single welt pocket, because the way, you know, the way I build it, it enables you to actually match a pattern when you're installing it. And I was talking to a friend of mine this morning. It's like, for me, it's like, if it misses even by a millimeter, it drives me crazy. And so this is how I figured out how to do it. And so without any other questions, if there are no other questions, we will just get to it. So, and this is a fairly long video. So, you know, if you want me to stop, you know, shout out, because I won't be able to see you. Give me a shout out and I can stop the video and answer the questions as they go along. So let us continue. Okay, then.
These are the welts for the welt pocket.
So now everyone can hear that? Yes?
Yes.
Good, okay.
And the instructions that follow will show us how to make this. But let me show you a little something here. This is the face, but when you turn it over, if you really look carefully, there is a seam here, and it's hidden by the fabric, but you can see, there it is. There is a seam here. So there's not a seam on this end and not a seam on this end. The beauty of this particular construction is that you have 3 folded edges and no additional thickness here and here. To achieve this, it first starts with the pattern. And that's what we'll start with, drafting the pattern for the welt. Before we make the welt pocket, though, we need to make the pattern. I like to show this because it's useful to know how to make the pattern for any shape of welt. This is, I think it's called a quadrilateral or a quadrangle. It's 4-sided. This is the welt guide that we're going to be using. You can see this points up. This line is what will sew the welt into the body of the garment. And you can see there's the grain line. So what I have done is I have copied this on fresh paper. So I have the up direction, I have the grain line here. And so now we're going to make the pattern. A little explanation. When you have one of these patterns, generally there's a fold here and then a seam on this end and on this end. That's all well and good, but I think that it's a little too thick on the ends. So I'm going to show you how to pivot these end seams to the back. As you can see, I have copied this on fresh paper, and let me just label this. This is the face or the front. The other side is going to be the back. So our first step is fold the paper on this fold line.
And a quick question.
Yeah.
That's a
So that line going diagonal, is that the grain line?
This is the grain line. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
here, and then we want to cut this out. And with some tape, these ends closed. One end tape closed, the other end tape closed. Let's get rid of that there. Okay. So this is the front. This would be the back. So what we want to do is we're going to pivot these ends. We're going to create a seam here and here. So this is like a little handbag. The easiest way to figure out how to place your seam, you're just going to fold. That fold will be a line. And then this fold will be a line. So when you're making this pattern, the thing to know is that the lines start at the cut edge and go towards the corners. So now from here, I'm just going to label, this is for navigation. These two are points A, that's going to be B at the corner, and then C and D. So these I will use to navigate through the construction. At this point, you want to cut one layer. I know it seems obvious, but I've had people cut both. So
Show the folding again, Kenneth.
What's that?
Did you show the folding again?
Okay. We're just folding it. We just fold it. Hang on. We fold it along this line here.
Yep.
And then we're going to cut it out.
Yep.
Like so.
I meant when you fold the corners.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I wasn't clear.
You know, it's not. What you're going to do is you're going to fold that edge and line it up with the top fold of the welt.
Yes.
So that, you know, the fold is going to come across here. And then here, this edge will line up with the top edge here. So then your other fold is going to occur right about there.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's see. Just continue on.
And then this fold will be a line. So when you're making this pattern, the thing to know is that the lines start at the cut edge and go towards the corners. So now from here, I'm just going to label, this is for navigation. These two are points A, that's going to be B at the corner, and then C and D. So these I will use to navigate through the construction. At this point, you want to cut one layer. I know it seems obvious, but I've had people cut both. So we cut C to D and A to B. Lay this out flat here is, that's what the pattern looks like. And just to have the lines, I'm going to draw a line there, a line here. So there we are. That is the pattern. We're not going to add seam allowances. We're going to do that in the construction of the garment. So here's the pattern. Next, cutting out the materials.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it here and see if there are any other questions.
Do you add the seam allowance when you're cutting it out, or when do you add the seam allowance?
Well, you'll see that next, because see, what we're going to do is we're going to draw all of this on a large piece of silk organza. And
Okay.
so we're not, so we don't add any seam allowances here. We just start with a big piece of fabric and we trim it down during construction.
Okay.
Okay.
First, we mark the silk organza. Now notice I'm laying the organza on top of the pattern. It's much easier. And I'll pin it in a few places. Now, the fold should be parallel with either the lengthwise grain or the crosswise grain. The silk organza doesn't have to be on the same grain as the main body. The main body grain line, that's really just for the fashion fabric itself, not for the understructure. So now what I will do, and this is one of those times you can use a Sharpie, it's allowed. Some people clutch their pearls and see that I'm using a Sharpie, but it's considered legitimate. We want to transfer all of this information onto the organza. So here I have all of the information transferred to the organza. What I will do next off camera is to flip the pattern over to get the piece for the opposite side. And I will bring that back once I'm finished. So here I have both pocket pieces. We have mirror images here. So then the next step is going to be taking the pattern piece, holding it closed, because we're going to be using this to cut the interfacing. There we go, better. This we'll use to cut our canvas. So I will go get some canvas and bring it back here. Here is a scrap of our canvas, and I'm going to put this long line, this is the fold line, on the lengthwise grain. This is cut double, so you can cut both at the same time. Really, there we are. Finally, what I like to do, since we're going to have a fold on this edge, and this edge, I want to shave off 1/8 of an inch on that fold there, along the top edge. You want this canvas to be slightly smaller than the welt so that it doesn't create a bind inside of the welt at the end. And then here. Now we have 2 mirror images. Next, we apply this to the organza. I worked ahead and pinned one of the pieces of canvas down. So really what you're doing here is you want to line the lower edge up with this lower edge here, and you want to make it so that this is centered all the way around. You'll see about 1/8 of an inch outside these cut edges of the canvas, and that's as it should be. So what I will do is I will go over to the machine and sew through the canvas and the organza with a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag stitch, but we're just going to sew this together. No mystery there, so I will bring back the finished product. So here, this is what we have. This is just a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag, or if you don't have a zigzag stitch, you could just sew with 2 rows of straight stitching. This is just holding the canvas to the organza. This will be the side that goes against the face fabric, but we'll cover that in a moment. Now that we have the 2 welt unit support structures, next we go to the coat itself. Before I begin, what I like to do is to use a stay tape. You could use seams grate, you could use any other kind of fusible stay tape to stay the armhole, the neck, and the front edge of the jacket front. You can see here we have our tailor tacks, we have our center fronts. So this is.
Kenneth, may I interrupt, please?
Yes, go ahead.
So in my sewing experience, which is minimal so far, I do not use stay tape. I just do a row of straight stitches with the machine.
Well,
So
you know, I tend to prefer a stay tape, especially if the fabric is a little bit loosely woven or stretchy. And so, you know, on something like this, if you just have the stay tape there that's going to get caught in the seam later, you don't run the risk, because we're going to be handling these fronts. We're going to be handling most of these garment sections a little bit. So if you stay it at the very beginning, then you don't have to worry about stretching. Just with just a stay stitch, you know, that's kind of a classic way of doing it. I found, though, that even if you use a machine stay stitch without any kind of support underneath to keep it from stretching, it's going to stretch.
And does that remain in the garment forever?
Yes. And so, you know, what's going to happen is this stay tape is going to straddle the stitching line, so that when you sew the two together, it's going to get caught in both sides of the seam.
I see. And if I was to go to online or go to a store, it'll be labeled stay tape. That's
well, you know, the brand name that you normally see is called Seams Great. It's a fusible tricot. It's a little narrow fusible tricot. It's just, you know, you would just ask them for fusible stay tape.
Okay, thank you.
There are different kinds.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
My fabric has a pile. It's cashmere.
Okay.
And it crushed. It was a bit crushed from how it was stored, which I managed to steam most of it out and cut around it. And I used your velvet pad that I got from you to do that.
Yes.
I'm fusing my stay tape on. I need to be really careful, right?
Well, you know, what I would do is do a test before you actually do it on your real fabric. But you know, you could probably get it, even if you put the stay tape to the seam allowance side of the stitching line, that would stay it pretty well.
Okay.
So you could worry about, you know, if you smash the seam allowance nap a little bit, it's going to be inside, it won't show.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, so we'll continue.
Before you address the working with the front, so that you don't end up distorting anything. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this away and move this in. So what I've done here to kind of explain, you can see that this fabric has sort of a subtle vertical stripe. I'll zoom in just for a moment. The horizontal stripe isn't that pronounced. It's really the vertical that I'm concerned about. So what I want to do when I install the welt, I want the grain of the welt to match the grain of the fabric. So what I've done here, this is just a thread tracing up one of the stripes so I can see what I'm doing. And I also made a line of thread between this tailor tack and this tailor tack. Now in my example, maybe in yours too, the pocket welt ends up a little shorter than this, so you align it with the top tailor tack. Now here we are. So here is this. Now the canvas is underneath because the face fabric is going to be on top. But what I want to do is I want to see where the placement of that line is. So if you're wanting to match a pattern or a stripe, this is really the way to do it. And that's one of the advantages of using the organza, is you can draw the stripe on the organza so that when you lay it out onto the fabric, you can get a good match. So what I'm going to do here we are. That is going to be the line for the stripe. We'll do this on the other side as well, but I'm going to work with this half for this particular example. So once we have this and we have the other one marked, we're going to go to the fabric to get the fabric onto the welts. So to refresh, this line here equals this line here. So now what we want to do, put this aside, I have another piece of fabric and we want to pick out a line on this that we transfer to the back. So I'm going to put a pin right there. So you can see there is a line going up. So to begin, I'm going to anchor the thread here. So then the object here is long stitches underneath, short stitches on top, because we want this, we want to see this grain line from the back. Because again, we want the grain line of the welt on the face fabric to match the fronts. So short stitch here, show you what it produces here. It produces a longer stitch on the back that we can see. So I will go off camera and finish this and bring it back and show you the result. So here you can see I have a lengthwise grain and a crosswise grain marked because it does have a subtle little bit of crosswise grain. What I've done here on the organza, I compared it to the face fabric, and there, that is where a crosswise grain will hit. So what I will do here is I will line up, there we are, line up the lengthwise grain and crosswise grain. So I've lined up this, and we can just pin here and here. So we've lined up lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, so that when this shows on the body, it will be correct. Next, we're going to sew the organza to the face fabric. Our next step is to sew outside these lines. Don't sew on this side of the line, sew outside. See, these are the lines where the welt will fold. We want the stitches to land on the inside. So this is a single thread, and it really is just a tiny little stitch. I'm using a contrasting thread, obviously, for demonstration purposes, but if you sew it correctly, it really won't show. I'll show you this here. As you can see, like I said, outside that line. Almost done. Secure the thread. And just going to pin that there, pin that there. So when I turn this over, first off, I'll show you. This is what it should look like on the back. And now notice you don't have any real show through on the front. So those stitches just barely catch the fabric. You just want to hang the canvas by the organza. Now next, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew a machine stitch across the bottom. So all 4 sides of this quadrangle are anchored. So here, we're just going to sew on that line. Standard stitch. Just want to anchor it down like so. And there we have it. So that is what we just sewed. So now we take this back to the work table and we're going to pin the ends. Now this is where the letters come in. I've remarked the letters on this one. So we're going to match point A to point A, and we're going to sew from A to B. What that looks like. Put the pin in A, fold right sides together, and bring the pin out on point A. So we have an in on point A, out on point A. We pin, then we pin based from A to B. So we just want to make sure that those 2 lines are pinned to each other. Now I will go over to the machine. I'm going to start at A, back tack, and sew down to B and back tack, and I'll bring it back and show you the result. As you can see here, started at A, stitch down to B, and back tack. So from here, we want point C with point C. Let's match these 2, make sure they're nice and smooth. So point C with point C, point C, and then we pin based between C and D. And again, start the stitching at C, back tack, sew down to D, and back tack. So I will bring back the results. So here we have sewn from C to D. Now, we're going to trim the seam allowances to 1/4 inch, and then just take that off to get rid of it. 1/4 inch. Now here, make a clip 90 degrees to the stitching line right at the end. And clip that one. We'll do the same thing. A to B, trim the seam allowance to 1/4 inch, and then get rid of the rest of this. And that's a little oopsie right there. That's not going to kill you. And here. So, to give you an idea, a little preview of where this is going, see, that is how the seams will go on the back. Next, pressing.
So I'm going to stop it here and see if anyone has any questions. No questions? We good?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me unmute.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I mean, did you come up with that?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, especially the organza thing. You know, if you're matching a pattern, this is really the best way. Because see, my whole thing is it's repeatable, reliable, and as easy as possible because I'm lazy.
Repeatable, reliable. I agree with you. Easy. Wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a little fiddly. You know, there's a lot in the setup, but you know, what you spend is sort of like investing in something. Like what you invest in the setup, you get the payoff when it actually matches. So yeah, so that's how it goes.
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah. So other questions? Okay, well, let us continue.
First, we press the seams as sewn, and then on the point presser, I'm going to open up the seams. Okay, now something to see here. So you have these two 90-degree cut edges. You're going to overlap the two fabrics. And by overlapping them, later on we'll reduce the bulk, but that's just going to make your life easier. So then here, same thing. You want to press the seam open. And these two overlap as well. Now let me give you a good view of this. Okay. See how, here we are. See how this seam allowance goes that way and this one goes over that way. We're going to reduce the bulk later, but I just wanted to show you that up close. Next, we turn everything right side out. So I've turned everything right side out. So now we want that to sit under there and this to sit over. And same here, we want that seam allowance to go that way and that to sit over. And now, this is face down, we are going to press and there we are. Finally, to close the welt, where is it? There we are. There's your machine stitch that we sewed earlier. I'm going to sew through all the layers on that stitch again, and then I will meet you back at the work table. So here we are. You can see there's the machine stitching, and you can see we've sewn through all the layers. Now you can get rid of the basting. It has served its purpose, and we're done. So here is our welt. The next stop is going to be top stitching. If you choose to use top stitching, which I'm choosing to do, this is the time to do it. So as you can see here, I have chosen ribbon floss in a chain stitch for the collar and the cuff latches. So it stands that I would choose the same ribbon floss for the 2 pocket welts. Next, we're going to prepare the pocket welt to add to the pocket bag. Before we add the welt to the pocket, we need to trim this seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch. Easy to do. 3/8 of an inch is going to come in handy. There we have the 2 welts. Next, the pockets. Here is the pocket bag with the welt attached. This is face side up, and the welt, as you can see, is sewn to the pocket, face side up. So now, let me talk about what happens here and how we get there.
Yes,
By face side up, you mean what's going to show inside the pocket?
that's correct. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
This is the pocket bag, face side up. And you can see I pressed a crease. And really how you do that is you just line all the edges up, press that crease, open it up face side up. So from here, this is the welt, cut edge stitching line. We will line up the cut edge and center it on the pocket. So again, cut edge is on the crease, and pin it down in a couple of places. This is where I like to check myself before I go any further to make sure that I have one for each side. You just want to look and make sure that this one faces this way and this one faces this way. I get dyslexic, so I have to check these things. So we will take this over to the sewing machine and sew the welt to the pocket. I'll meet you at the machine.
Kenneth, it's Vivian.
Yes.
So
the welt pocket is equidistant from each side of the pocket bag?
Yes, you want this distance between the end of the welt and the cut edges to be the same.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Is the stitching. What we want to do with the needle is we want to lower the needle and see how the needle bumps up against the edge of the welt right on that stitching line. That is what you're looking for. Because to start this, we're going to start with an extremely short stitch, a 0.5. And we want the beginning and the end of the stitching to be right at the edge of the welt, no further out. Stitch about 3/8 of an inch. Then lengthen the stitch to 2.5, just the standard default length. And you're going to sew again right on that stitching line till about 3/4 of an inch from the end. And then again, watch this, shorten that stitch to 0.5. So you're going to sew till the first time that needle falls off the edge. It's better to be a little too short here rather than a little too long, because if it's a little too long, when you install the pocket, you're going to have a gap at each end. So there. See. And now we will go back to the work table. We have one final step before we install these pockets into the jacket. You can see here, there's the stitching line. We want to, now you don't cut through the pocket bag, but you want to cut angle here and another steep angle here. Now there is about a 1/16 of an inch or about 1.5 millimeters between the short stitches and the edge of the fabric. Pull out here a little bit because what you're creating, if you look at the shape of that seam allowance, you know, the stitching line from here down to here and up, this cut edge is going to be your stitching guide in the next step when we install these into the coat. So what we've done here, we have prepared the pocket welts and the pocket bags. In our next lesson, we're going to install the pockets into the coat.
Okay, so are your brains exploding yet?
Yeah. Kenneth?
Yes.
It's Ruth. I have a question.
Yes.
When you were initially placing the welts alongside the iron portion of the bag, was it right up against that iron line, or was it just
right
to the?
It should be right up against. You know, if it misses a little bit, which it did in the video, it's not going to kill you later.
Okay.
Because that's going to be inside the garment, under a lining. So, you know, shh, don't tell anyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Is it, so is everyone like, you know, 2 X's for eyes at this point?
No, I'm excited.
Well, you know, this particular pocket turns out right every time. And years ago, when I realized this pocket was good, I was talking to Edward Mader, who was the curator of costumes and textiles at the LA County Museum of Art at the time. And so I had my turquoise princess phone, and I was putting in some welt pockets as I was talking to him. And he said, I hear your sewing machine. What are you sewing? And I said, oh, I'm putting in welt pockets. And there was this long silence. And he said, I am so impressed that you can put in welt pockets and talk on the phone at the same time. And it's like, well, because I found my method. I know it works. So repeatable, reliable, because I'm lazy. I don't want to do it twice. I don't want to have to recut a front. I just don't want to do that. So this, I use this exclusively. I show my students at FIT this one because it just works every time. Okay, so other questions, other comments, other
Kenneth?
Yes.
The okay, so going back to the top stitching, just a quick question. Did you tell us how far from the folded edge we're supposed to do the top stitching?
For the collar, I use 3/4.
Okay.
For the welts and for the cuff latch, you could use 1/2 inch or 5/8.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so, okay, other questions? Yes, Richard.
I was thinking to work on ivory, and then the Sharpie, I don't think it will shadow. So any alternative?
You could use just regular pencil.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the canvas will be okay. It won't darken the ivory.
Well,
Should
you
be
know,
fine, right?
or what you could use is, it's a little bit tricky, but you could use a disappearing ink pen.
Oh,
because
yeah.
what I found, and this is this brand. Oh, here we are. The Friction brand.
Okay.
And you can do a test on it. What I found is that if you use this to mark on organza, and if you press it out, it will leave a little white shadow. which for a light fabric is okay because, white it's not going to read through. So do a little experimentation on that before you do it.
Thank you.
Use like a pale pastel color pencil. There are different ways to do it. I just use the Sharpie because this fabric is like burlap. You're not going to see anything through it. Okay.
And when I saw that, I thought I would make an ivory. Now I decided probably not.
Well, you see, I rarely work in light colors. I rarely do. You have to put a gun to my head or a check under my nose to work in light colors because you have to be so careful. And when years ago, this is before they changed the formulation of Scotchgard. If I had to work on something that was a pastel, I automatically Scotchgarded the fabric before I began.
Okay, thank you.
Just a little bit of insurance. Okay. Oh, there's another thing that you might consider. It's a little bit obscure, but it's just good to know about. If you've ever seen heavily beaded wedding gowns under black light, you see all the markings. There are pencils and powder that glow under black light but don't show up under regular light. So, if you're really, really worried about anything showing, if you could track down one of those pencils, that would work as well. Then of course you have to have a black light, but it's another option. I know it's, there's so many rabbit holes you could go down with sewing tools, and I'm happy to do that because it's what I do for my living. So, yeah. Okay. So other questions?
Kenneth, if I want to revisit this a couple of months and make this coat again, because I think I'm going to really like this coat. We have access to these videos.
Well, yeah. Okay. So how the videos work is because see, like we've done so far, I send you the Zoom class and then I send you the videos that are contained in the Zoom class. So what I've done, I just plan on, so what I say is don't pass these around to other people because you paid for this. These live on an unlisted channel on YouTube. The Zoom meetings might fall off eventually, but the videos for the class will remain. So, if you want to go back 2 months later or whatever and refer to it, it's going to be there. That's my plan. Okay.
What about 6 months? We can still go back?
Yeah. Okay. I don't, if I see evidence that people are passing around the links, I would probably change them. But for the most part, it's just, once I have them load, because it's a whole thing, you have to download it, you have to wait, you have to process, there's a whole thing. So once I have that thing on YouTube with its link in the unlisted channel, it's just much easier to leave it there than to try to change it every time I change the class. So also, I just think it's fair because, you were here, you paid for it. You should have access to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Because I know you're not going to pass around the links. That's, because one of the things I found, I got an email from someone recently who said that it was on Facebook. Someone had posted one of my PDF books. I can't remember which one right now. And she just emailed me and said, I think you need to know about this so that you can do what you need to do. So I was able to contact Facebook and say he's in violation of my copyright and all of that. So yeah, so I don't worry about people passing around the links too much because I just assume that the people who take my classes are of a higher moral caliber than standard people. So yeah, so I just leave the links up.
Thank you for the compliment.
Well, no, I really do believe that my classes are self-selecting because early on, this is a little off topic, but like when I first in the 89, 90, when I first started teaching, I had several people kind of sit me down and say, you can't talk about this gay thing. I'm like, really? You can see in satellite photos from space that I'm gay. And if I were, no, seriously, it's like, I can't hide it. I can't pass. And so there are people who don't take my classes because of that. And my feeling is like, well, then you miss out. So, I just assume, the people who come around are just better. So there you have it. Okay. So other questions?
Could I just be really annoying going back to these lectures? Because I've put the, I've done it and I put the lining on and I've forgotten to do the buttonholes. So what am I supposed to do?
Well, you know what you can do is you can just choose to use worked buttonholes.
Is that okay? Just stick it in the machine and.
Well, but that's, as we get down the road, and if you, go back and look at the coat that I showed in the video on the first class, those are machine buttonholes.
Is that what they've done? Okay, fine.
So,
Good, because
I give the buttonhole as an option for those who want it, but you don't have to.
Okay, bro. Thank you.
And as far as like hand worked buttonholes, I can do them, but why?
Why, indeed.
Honestly, I can make a good job of it, but it takes me forever.
I did the welted ones on the main front, so I was pleased with that, but I just can't.
Don't make yourself crazy. No, because most people won't notice.
Yeah, quite.
The thing is, you don't point out to people. See, this is something that I have this little video that I call a save that I show my students about this frock coat I made last November, and there was a big boo boo. And so I showed them the save and I said, okay, and the corollary to that is you don't tell people it's a save. When they see it, they say, oh, you even embellished the inside. And I say, yes, I did. So don't tell them that. They don't need to know that. That's part of the process. So yeah, people won't notice. And if they do, if they want to call you out on it, you just say, you want to make me one? Really, honestly, there are times you just go, there's some people, I've had people make comments and what I've learned to say is, what an extraordinary comment.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because, it goes along with my mother had a lawyer when I was growing up, and he was the voice of reason in my teenage years. His name was Harry. He looked like George Burns in the movie Oh God. And he was the one who explained things to me. He was the one who sat me down, and I think he saw everything. He understood what was going on long before I even did. So he had the it gets better talk with me. I remember the first time we talked, he kind of he just said, I know it sucks for you right now, but this is not forever. You just have to last. And one of the other things he said, because my mother, she had some misadventures in romance, let's just say. And her second husband, it ended up, I had to testify in court. Long story. There's a podcast if you really want to hear it. And so Harry said two things. He said, okay, these two bits of advice are going to serve you now and forevermore. First, if someone asks you a question, you answer the question and then you shut up. If the answer is yes, it's yes, full stop. Don't go any further. Drove my mother crazy. She'd ask me a question and I would answer the question and she'd be standing there. I'd be like, what? I answered your question. So he never told her he had told me this. He said, the second thing is if someone says something that requires a response and you just don't know what to say, you say indeed. And when I was on Martha Stewart a few years back, I wore my Fortuny jacket because I knew that we weren't going to hang around in the green room and I had to get some rapport going with her. So she came out, we shook hands. I said, Fortuny, but you knew that already. And she went into this charming reverie about how she loved Fortuny fabrics. And moments before we went on, she looked me square in the eyes and she said, did you know that cat pee dissolves the gold paint off that fabric? You heard me right. Yes. And I said, indeed. And they said, you're on. And to this day, I don't really remember much past that because I did okay. They were really happy with it. But the whole time I'm thinking there's only one way she could know that. So, but yeah, I just said, indeed, it saves your bacon. So that's really an extraordinary comment. Falls in the same category. And it's useful when you need to say something, but you just don't know what to say. Okay, other questions, folks?
I've used your Indeed. Because I've heard the podcast, I've done it. It works.
It does, because it throws the ball back in their court. You've not said anything. It
Yes.
really is true. And and there's so many other like things that Harry just, I think back and I'm sure he's probably in heaven now. He was my mother's age, but he he kind of explained things. He kept me from going crazy as a teenager because things were a little bit crazy when I was a teenager. But yeah, and he had a really good sense of humor. And he kind of rolled with things. Now, this is gonna be a little bit off color story. So, if you don't want to, hold yours. One time, it was after college. I was driving by. I was in the neighborhood where his office was, and I saw his car was there. I thought I'll just stop in and see if Harry is there. And so I got there, and he was out in his little reception area, and so we chatted for a few minutes, and then I heard this door open, and he said, "Oh, you get to meet my new law partner." And this guy walked out into the room, and the guy looked at me, and I looked at him. We had had a brief anonymous fling. And imagine George Burns doing this, because this is what it was. Harry, he did this. And he said, "You are no doubt familiar with his distinguishing characteristic." And I went, but that was it. I mean, it was like we moved on. It was not like, "Oh my God," or anything like that. It was just that, because he wasn't stupid. And I was 22, and I had not learned to I didn't have a game face at the time. So yeah, so he was the voice of reason when I was growing up. So I learned indeed from Harry.
Kenneth, what's this podcast?
Well, it's on iTunes. You can get on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, I think. It's called All Grown Up Now. It is the first episodes 1 through 29 are my novel, All Grown Up Now, Friendship in 3 Acts. So if you're going to listen, like sequentially, 1 through 29 is all one story. And then starting at episode 30, it's like All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. They're independent stories. Each one is sort of freestanding, so you don't have to listen to them in order. And so the most recent one that I released last week was called The Bishop's Pockets. Oh, so, Laura, you're chuckling. Did you hear it? Yeah. And it was this is like, okay, when I was young and reckless in San Francisco, I was also a little bit not really. I was a little, it takes me sometimes to really realize what's going on. And this was a story of, it didn't dawn on me for 25 years what was going on. And it dawned on me in a class in Toronto, and all these the people there were like, where are we going with this? So yeah, that's a teaser. You'll have to go listen to it. So yeah, you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, the usual podcast outlets.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so I believe our work is done. So let's see, Sharon here. Oh, hi, Sharon. I set up our link for tomorrow's office hour at 5:30. So I will email you that probably later
Okay.
today.
Monday, right?
Monday. Yeah, I'm sorry. Monday. It's, it's
Okay, thank you.
The days bleed into weeks. And so yeah, so anyone else, with your office hour, please don't be shy about, you can have it now, you can have it later. I just want to make sure everyone gets their office hour. So yeah, so there you have it. And with that, I think we are done for the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Good
See
weekend.
you there.
Thank you.
See you next
Bye.
week.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank you.
Bye.